Participate, engage, speak out, use your voice to be an effective advocate. The Voices in Advocacy podcast examines the diverse landscape of advocacy, exploring the ins and outs of building influence, driving change, and creating champion advocates. It's now time for the Voices in Advocacy podcast with your host, Roger Rickard.
Hello and welcome to the Voices in Advocacy podcast. I'm Roger Rickard, president and founder of Voices in Advocacy, where we work with organizations to inspire, engage, educate, and activate your supporters by turning them into effective, influential advocates. And this is the podcast dedicated to the art of advocacy. This podcast is for the people that work and engage in advocacy efforts, be they for corporations, associations, trade organizations, and nonprofit cause groups. If you're one of the people that work to build grassroots advocacy and grow your community of advocates, then you're in the right place. And finally, if you are already an advocate and want to learn more, this podcast is for you. So now, let's get started. Today's episode, we meet Hollis, Chip Felkel. Chip Felkel is a veteran strategist and public affairs consultant who advises corporate decision makers, issue-based campaigns, and select political candidates at the state and local level. He is currently the CEO of the Felkel Group, where he provides strategic counsel, advocacy, and communications guidance on policy issues, working with Fortune 500s, privately held companies, and state and national groups. He is also the founder of the RAP Index, a world-class software solution that allows users to identify key relational assets to amplify their message with elected officials via personal, direct engagement. Chip has served in various roles with well over 100 different political campaigns around the country. 4 were key roles with presidential campaigns, and I'm pleased to report that 3 out of those 4 became president. Chip is a native of the Palmetto State and holds degrees in political science and history from the University of South Carolina. His political viewpoint is sought regularly by national media outlets for his frank observations and assessments. Now, I'm sure he will be frank with us today as well. Chip, thank you and welcome to today's show.
Great to be with you, Roger. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And it's a pleasure to have a chance to talk about the Felkel Group and the RAP Index.
Well, we'll get right into that. Chip, you know, your background's pretty impressive. Your understanding of politics from both the campaign viewpoint as well as from the needs of organizations to use their grassroots assets to drive policy actions. So before we really get into that, a couple of quick diversions here. What made you, now I think I probably know the answer to this, but what made you choose the University of South Carolina, and then why political science and history?
Well, it's interesting. I grew up in the state near Charleston, the corner of where the PD and the Low Country merge. I had looked at several other schools, grew up in a real small town. My dad was a graduate of USC on the GI Bill, grew up a fan of the school, looked at going out of state, looked at a couple of smaller colleges, but when it came time to make that decision, sometimes you just know that's where you're supposed to be. So I'm now the son of a graduate, and the father of a current student. So it's a Gamecock family.
Well, that means all the money still goes to Columbia, doesn't it?
That's right. And as for the degrees, it's interesting. I started as a journalism major. I had an interest in journalism in high school, wrote for local papers and so forth, and had visions of being a press secretary, but I realized I didn't have a face and I could never really pull that off. So I moved into the political science arena. Like most political science majors, thought about law school, but I never made it back. I just married an attorney, and so I got to pay for it anyway.
But now you get the legal counsel.
There you go.
Sometimes whether you want it or not.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's funny that you bring up the journalism spin on that, because I learned that you wrote a book entitled Political golf, drive your bottom line in politics and policy. Tell me why you wrote the book.
Well, there seems to be either an unwillingness or a hesitancy so much with corporate America, C-suites especially, that get frustrated by the political process. And so sometimes you have to meet them halfway to get to something where they can understand what you're trying to tell them. A lot of people play golf in this country. And we thought that using golf as an analogy to help decision makers in a corporate level get a better understanding of how they needed and must participate and what the arena was really like by using the game of golf as something for them to link in with themselves. And it's been successful. We've made it is a game of pressure. It's a game of sometimes you play with different partners. It's expensive sometimes.
Different clubs.
You play a different club, and the pressure point usually if you're on 18 at Augusta and the whole world's watching and you miss an easy putt, everybody knows about it. So we thought the analogies were appropriate.
That's great. So creating the book and writing the book, how does that kind of apply to your work today?
Well, I'm not going to suggest that what I do is rocket science, but it is a science, and it is something that doesn't necessarily come naturally to people in engaging and participating in our process. Now, I would also say that we are woefully inadequate in this country with basic civics and history, and yet government touches every aspect of our lives. Some people would say that's a terrible thing. Some people would say that's a good thing. Either way, if you're in an industry, in an association, if you're in higher ed, you have to deal with government in some form or fashion. And people need to be more comfortable with that. It shouldn't be the boogeyman. It should be where you can get help or assistance or protection or whatever. And you need to feel as a citizen more comfortable engaging with your government. And that translates into how we operate with our clients and how we try to impress upon them the importance of civic engagement, but also the importance of recognizing if you don't explain your story, somebody else will.
Yeah. You got to be your own voice there, don't you?
Right.
Yeah. So now coming up in your professional career, I highlighted that you worked for many political campaigns before beginning your own firms. Has that helped you in having a better understanding of the multitude of issues elected officials deal with on a day-to-day basis?
Well, they literally are overwhelmed. And in most states, particularly, they don't have the staff and the resources to sort through, which makes it even more important for organizations to get a grasp on being succinct and using the right messengers in terms of their issues. Everyone knows the lobbyist, whether they're a contract lobbyist or they're an in-house lobbyist, everybody knows that person is paid to have an opinion. So there's a degree of, I wouldn't say inauthenticity, but when you can replace that with a voice that they respect, has credibility, that is recognized, and frankly, that they know outside of the industry, maybe it's personal relationship, college roommates, whatever, and that's what's tied in with our software, you can be much more impactful. You might get a meeting you weren't going to get. You might get an ear over a fence post that you weren't going to get. You might have an opportunity at a soccer match to have a conversation. Now, that's great, but you've got to make sure that your advocates are engaged and educated to the extent that they can be useful and valuable, but not dangerous.
Right. And we're gonna dive into that as we go forward. But before we kind of dip our toe into that, you're absolutely right, whether it's a soccer match or not. And I know you and I have shared comments about a very well-known former U.S. senator, and my relationship was developed over ice hockey. And we became incredibly close over those years because of ice hockey. And, right. And it's amazing. It's amazing what can happen when you have that personal connection. But before we dive deeper into that, what type of clients does the Felkel Group have, and what kind of work do you provide for them?
Well, I think our focus would be best characterized as communications and messaging. Framing issues in a way that the public and those elected officials can better understand on what the impact of those particular issues are. We work with a wide range, groups like the Nature Conservancy, groups like Santee Electric Co-op in South Carolina, which is our version of the Tennessee Valley Authority. We have done work in the past for groups like Verizon and AT&T and Exxon. So we're able to help frame those issues in a way that not only educates, but also motivates and engages other people to get involved on their behalf. We do a lot of third-party recruitment, finding those other voices outside of their stakeholder universe. We help them, but we do a lot of really framing messages for organizations. I don't want to say dumbing it down, but making it succinct so that it is understandable.
Yeah. Because we know time is of an essence when you're dealing with any type of an elected official. There's only so much time, and you need to make the most of that in the most succinct period that you have. You're absolutely right. So as I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier here, and a little bit of full disclosure, Chip and I have worked together with his RAP Index advocacy software solution. With that out in front, Chip, can you explain for the audience what is RAP Index, and maybe even begin with, and for those that are listening to this on a podcast, that's RAP Index. And what does the RAP stand for?
Sure. RAP stands for relationships, advocability, and political capital. And the genesis for this was a lot of that work we've already talked about under the Felkel Group, where we have done countless public affairs, multi-state issue advocacy campaigns. And we realized how many of our clients did not have a great grasp on one of the most valuable things that they could leverage, which is those assets or relational assets that their stakeholders have with elected officials. Now, if you ask a group, they'll tell you sure, we've tried to track that, but there's never been a platform or a system that would systematically, objectively assess the breadth, depth, and scope of a relationship with a policymaker, state, local, federal, could then ascertain what is their advocability. For us, that's their willingness and ability to be an advocate. People can have relationships and not be willing to use them. You need to know that as well, because otherwise you make an assumption that because they tell you they have a relationship, they're going to be someone you can then engage.
Count on, yeah.
Not necessarily true all the time. So knowing who those individuals know, knowing how well they know them, knowing the breadth and scope of the relationship, knowing what they're willing to do. Is it call, write a letter? Is it text someone? Is it do a video call? Is it go to an event and speak with them? Knowing that. And then and the P stands for political capital. What's their personal political capital? Where are they engaged outside of your organization that might be beneficial to you in terms of your messaging and communications? All of that's scored on a.
So how do you score that? How do you even get this information? And are people willing to share that?
It's important yes, they are. It is captured through an online survey. The individual stakeholder is sent an online survey from someone in the organization they're likely to respond to. It's messaged in a way that says, look, relationships still matter despite this digital world we live in. It could be very important to us and effective if you'd be willing to share. It's no right or wrong answers. Now, what does that do immediately? It immediately tells you who's willing to participate and who isn't. You know from the moment you send the survey out if someone is now a potential advocate for you. From that, we do a home address and zip code match, pull up their elected officials. If they tell us they have any relationship whatsoever, we dig in a little deeper and get to those key determinants, if you will. Last time they had contact, how would they contact them, or how would they connect with them? Would they be willing to write letters and so forth and so on? But the beauty of it is then we get these golden nuggets. And we give them the opportunity to tell us, you mentioned ice hockey. We get information such as the senator and my son were college roommates. He is my first cousin. My personal favorite still is I'm married to the state senator. where the client didn't know that. And so now we've gotten past their issues and we've gotten to real life. We've gotten to real impact and authenticity that can allow them to go have conversations they might not necessarily get to have.
So I think organizations are familiar, and people that kind of work in customer service or work in sales are very familiar with what is known as a CRM, which is a customer relationship management software where you can track, who your prospects are, who the customers are, what, customer complaints are, actions that you need to take, those kind of things. So to me, this really sounds like this is an advocacy relationship management software. Is that a good way to put that?
That is very appropriate. And in fact, we use that term. As we develop advocates, there is a system to track their engagement. There's an ability for clients to, as a team is working on a project, to know who's used what stakeholder and the updates on that. And the essence of what we're doing, let's say you have a universe of 15,000 members or 5,000 employees or whatever. We are filtering up through our system. No harm, no foul, no right answer, no wrong answer. But we're giving that client a filtering of who their best messengers are. And we are creating, in essence, a SEAL team of advocates for that organization. Those are people, everyone knows what a SEAL team is. Those are people who are ready at a moment's notice to go. They are trained, they understand, they're well-versed in the issues surrounding, and they're dependable. And so that's what we're creating for organizations.
So it sounds to me, and of course, I think I know the answer to this, is that you really emphasize the importance of relationship development and continuity with these elected officials. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah, I think one of the struggles we have in society today is that we're too quick to simply, digital's great. Digital has a place. Every organization that might be listening to this is going to have a digital presence. But if you're doing it and I'm doing it and somebody else has a different view of an issue and they're doing it and somebody else has a slightly different version of the same issue is doing the same thing, what happens? You create a whole lot of noise.
Yeah.
You got to get past the noise. You got to get past the noise. And the way to do that is to go back to what we all grew up with, most of us anyway, is understanding that relationships still matter. And relationships can be a real cornerstone. Look, because of relationships, we have been able to get things in budgets for clients at the last minute on the Hill. We've been able to stop legislation before it ever got to a committee. We've been able to get valuable support from key members who didn't really weren't on a committee, but had a vote. And so again, just because of personal relationships where someone they knew and trusted and respected, who had credibility, became the voice for the organization. And that made all the difference in the world.
I don't know about you, but I know if I went to my wife the first day I met her and looked at her and said, "Will you marry me?" I don't think that would work.
Great point.
And as we talk about politics, all too often people show up and say, "Marry me," with an elected official, and the elected official has no idea who they are.
I've been on a date. I don't even know you.
That's right.
Buy me coffee or something.
That's exactly right. Please.
It's a great analogy, because too often we think they represent me. I live in their district. I got a problem. They need to fix it. No, doesn't work that way.
That's right.
You got to have credibility. You got to have authenticity. Right. And what we're all about with this platform is giving our clients authentic messengers and a SEAL team to go take that action.
Yeah, and I think you full-heartedly will agree that then you have to be honest. Then when you walk in the room, you have to be honest, and don't try to buffalo somebody, don't try to pull something over on somebody, because any credibility that you had or had prior to that is gone.
If you're not careful, you only get one shot.
That's right.
And you don't want to put them in a situation where the next time they see you, they're trying to avoid you.
So what? Yeah, exactly. So what you're really telling me, though, is that if we cut through this, it's those personal experiences and those personal relationships that helped drive it. We all go back, and I constantly use this because he was the master at this. Ronald Reagan was an absolute master at saying, well, I got a letter the other day from Johnny, and Johnny said,
right.
And then he told you. But that's those personal experiences that they need to know exactly what's happening on the ground, what's really happening in their district. And you combining that with your knowledge of how does that affect the political animal, if you will, the elected official that had to go through the political fight to gain that seat. So how do those two things tie together?
Well, it doesn't take a lot of people asking about an issue normally to raise the hair on the back of an elected official's neck, especially if it's people that they know. It's a little different if they have no idea who you are, but it doesn't take too many inquiries and too many people who are taking the time, because most people in America don't engage. But so if people will actually then take the time to raise the point, it doesn't take too long to get an important issue on their radar. And again, that the person doing that needs to be someone they have a past life experience with, not someone that they have just that says they live in their district, but they've never heard their name and know nothing about them or anything else.
That's right. Absolutely right. And they have to go about it in a way that isn't disagreeable.
Yeah. There's one of the things we vet in our, which I think is also important in our process, we do score the R, A, and P questions. Every respondent gets an average RAP index score, but then we filter that again so that the client has the ability to do a double check to make sure that even though they may be your stakeholder and they may agree with you on their issue, make sure they're not 180 degrees on another issue with that target, so that your meeting doesn't get hijacked to talking about something that has nothing to do with your organization.
That's right.
So we have this system that has now been used, by names like Walmart and General Motors and Allstate and state associations and Texas A&M, University of South Carolina, a wide range of state associations that allows them to have that confidence that they're putting their best possible foot forward. And as for lobbying groups, some people have asked, don't the lobbyists, they probably don't like this. Good lobbyists do, especially lobbyists that are maybe tackling technical issues where you can humanize an issue. It's not up and down. There's some technicalities to it, but if you can humanize it with one of these stakeholders that we've identified, it can make a big difference in how it's received.
So does REP really help organizations grow their community of advocates, or does it just simply better identify the depth of those advocates?
It does two things. Number one, it gives you a baseline of what you have to work with to start off with. Number two, you have the ability then, as you create more, call it internal enthusiasm about actually engaging. We've found groups that are able to then grow. It gives you the ability to then highlight successes, enthusiasm. People like to be part of the winning team. So more people then want to be more engaged or be a part of it that might not necessarily have been interested in advocacy before. And so it's two-pronged in that approach.
Yeah, and I think that we've seen in the last year, particularly even since the pandemic began and the effects that it's had on different industries and families and homes and viability and food shortages and so on and so forth, that there have been more people that have now had an interest, that know that government affects their everyday lives.
Look at it today with the challenges of COVID. Number one, the decisions that have been made about masking or not masking, how that's affected businesses. Chambers of Commerce is engaged on things. And now look at it, how it affects a rollout of a vaccine. It's still, the government has a role there. We will not get our economy back until we get rid of the virus. And so it's the thing that's a good example of people being more fully cognizant of just what a day-to-day impact the government
impact,
has.
yeah. So with your experience and literally combining both Rap Index and the Felkel Group, how do grassroots leaders engage and then re-engage to kind of keep them active? Because I think there's always been this teeter-totter of a balance of how much do we ask them to do, when do we ask them to do it, and then if we don't engage with them, then do they feel like they haven't been used?
Well, it's important that if someone tells you that they want to be a part of your advocacy effort, that you create a mechanism for not overkill, but steady updating, and make sure that they are not having to learn a textbook like this, at the last minute to feel comfortable. So number one, it's that. We have some of our clients can manage this data on their own. They have the bandwidth, but we have also found situations where, given our expertise and how we created this, where we will manage that entire key contact program, that sealed team effort for organizations. It is important, and I think this is probably one of the ways that we got here. I am in South Carolina. It is a small state. We have 2 senators and 7 members of Congress. Having to go back to the well to the same people every week or so on a different issue was one of the reasons that we realized we had to have there needed to be a better mousetrap. There needed to be a better way to find out what relationships existed, so you aren't having to ask the same person. Today it's Tuesday, let's talk, can you call the senator about insurance? Oh, it's Thursday, can you call the senator about environmental issues?
Right.
Finding people in your organizations, and they are there. Our data bears that out, that there are wonderful, valuable, impactful, willing advocates in what I would call with the unusual suspects within an organization. We're not talking about the CEO. We're not talking about the lobbyist. We're not talking about the C-suite. We're talking about the clerk on the 3rd floor that nobody ever talks to about politics, who's been sitting by the congressman in church for the last 30 years.
So that's interesting, because what you're also telling me is that these people may not have direct influence or knowledge of the elected official, but they may know the staff as well. They may know staff.
Certainly.
And that's
we find staff relationships, which can be just as important, particularly at a federal level.
Yep.
Because everything goes through staff anyway. And that is critical. We're able to find that as well, which makes it even that much more valuable. But I will go back to my unusual suspects comment, and that is this. They expect to hear from the CEO and the lobbyist. They expect to hear from the CFO. They don't expect to hear from Earl, whose kids played soccer with their kids. And if Earl can be engaged, it means even more.
That's right. There's more humanity that comes into that.
That's right. You're humanizing the issue.
Well, and it's like I often tell clients or prospective clients, what I talk about, when I speak or when I'm out trying to train people, it's you can do it, and you have done it, and you've stood up there and said it, either as the CEO or the head of advocacy, public policy, government relations. You've said those things, but when you have somebody from the outside comes in and says it, they hear it with a different voice, with a different tone than the person who's expected to deliver that. And that's really what you're getting at with the people that are the unusual suspects, that are in that. We had a client last year, this is the perfect example of it, very quiet, wanted to be on an advocacy committee with a client that I worked with, but was quiet constantly. And I made a simple comment about, it's not just who you know with elected officials, it's, do you know anybody on staff? And this guy had been on the committee for a year and a half, very, very quietly. And I get an email saying, I used to work for Senator so-and-so, and my roommate is the chief of staff.
There you go.
Boom.
Perfect example. Again, the value of relationships, the importance of using those assets, because those assets are authentic. those assets have credibility that you would never know unless you took the time to find out.
And the end result of that was, well, are you willing to reach out and see if we can get a meeting, or a Zoom call with the member? And he came back and said, well, not only that, but I talked to the chief of staff, and the chief of staff said, well, why don't he do a video for you for your Hill Day? And then on top of that, because he was willing to do the video, he wanted to know more information about it. Before you know it, became a co-sponsor of one of the bills that we were talking about, because now he was buying in. I get it.
It took that extra level of authenticity to be able to get what you were looking for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Chip, this has been fascinating. And I hope it's been fascinating for our viewers and guests today on the podcast. We've kind of reached our time limit here a little bit. How can people reach you for more information?
Certainly. The RAP Index website is www.rapindex.com. And of course, Felkel Group, Felkel Group.com. We would love to have a chance to talk with them. And not every company, we know that, is not everybody's a 100% match for what we're doing, but we can make a difference. And we'd love an opportunity to talk with them.
So what we will do is we will add Chip's contact information into the show notes. So whether you're listening to the podcast or you see it on YouTube, you will be able to get their contact information as well. Now that wraps up today's great conversation. And I don't say that lightly, because Chip and I could probably sit here for a couple hours and talk to you about this and come up with more and more reasons why people need to be able to grow their advocates, be able to manage the advocates better, and get the most out of those advocates. So it's been a great conversation with Chip, your Felkel Group and RAP Index. I want to thank you very much for being on today's show. Been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. Just thank to your listeners out there. If you've ever scrambled around at the last minute to find someone who could make a call or write a letter or attend an event, wouldn't it be great to have a database at your fingertips that would already tell you who was willing to do that?
Boy, that's a great closing comment, Chip. Very good. So now we're going to move into a very quick, my advocacy engagement tip. And today's tip is about not using all of your resources. Oftentimes, that's what people do. They don't use all their resources. Many groups fail because they didn't tap all of their connections and didn't realize who their connections were, what their resources were. Mm-hmm. They've left some stones right in front of them unturned. So at the beginning of an advocacy campaign, conduct a thorough search of possible local and national resources and partners and advocates for you that can work on the similar issues and concerns and that would be willing to assist in your cause. And I know using a tool like RAP Index can assist you in finding those hidden advocates. So just a couple of quick notes here at the end of the episode. If you're interested in being a guest on my show, please go to voicesinadvocacy.com and click on the contact us to let us know that your interest and why we should have you on the show. I would love to have you contribute your thoughts, because I am sure you are wiser than I am, and I learn a lot from conducting these interviews. So in upcoming episodes, you will be treated to great interviews from people that know advocacy, whether they're leaders in the world of politics, associations, nonprofit causes. I'm sure you will enjoy these interviews. So if you like today's podcast, head over to where you find your podcasts and subscribe to the Voices in Advocacy podcast today. A big thank you again to Chip for being on the show today. And a reminder that we at Voices in Advocacy work with organizations to inspire, educate, engage, activate your supporters by turning them into influential advocates. Well, that's it for today's episode. You have the power to be an effective, influential advocate. Good day.
We hope you enjoyed today's Voices in Advocacy podcast and look forward to you joining us again next week. To learn more about Voices in Advocacy, go to our website, voicesinadvocacy.com.